Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Historic Somerville's lecture today. My name is Eileen Schofield, and I'm the president of Historic Somerville. Today we're at the Dante Club, where usually we're at the Somerville Museum, but we have a very special exhibit over there, and I didn't want to disturb the exhibit for the lecture, so we switched the space. So I hope that the amenities are okay for you. I would first off like to say thank you for coming. If there is refreshments and drinks at the end, or if you'd like them right now, okay? We have left postcards on the table for you. If there's anything else that you need, please let somebody know at the reception. Okay? I'd like to introduce you to Lawrence Woolworth, and Lawrence is going to introduce our guest speaker for today. Thank you very much.
I am honored here today to introduce a comrade in arms, a friend. It's funny, when I'm celebrating my 50th anniversary from coming out of combat in Vietnam, he's celebrating, Lieutenant Colonel Enoch Woodhouse is celebrating his 75th anniversary enlisting in the Army June 1st, 1944. I took some of his photographs that he treasures in his family album, as a lot of us have, and with his presentation, you get a snapshot of his 75 years of service to his community, to his country, to his fellow comrades in arms. I'd like to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Enoch Woodhouse and his Looking Forward.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Wait a minute, I said good afternoon. Am I at an old folks sewing circle? Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Oh, okay, thank you very much. You know, it's an honor and privilege to speak, to exchange my experiences in the hope that we will have a better understanding of people different than we are, and that goes for me too. But when we get to know others, we get to know ourselves. That's why I'm here. Now, you know, families are like fudge. We all love chocolate, but in fudge there are a few nuts. But as families go, I want to give you or share with you the experiences of my family, of color, black, growing up in the projects in Roxbury, crime, drugs, police brutality, police enforcement, brutal. Now the question is, what happened to me? Why didn't I do it? Why wasn't I upset when I would see racial injustice, racial inequality, and some people just getting a bum rap, and some people seem to get the bum rap more than others for various reasons. Now, I'd like to go back, none of you can remember this, back to 1941 and 42. I don't think too many ladies are over 39, so you might know me. Put your hand down. I'd like you to sort of press the button to have the machine of time go back to 1941. Now, 1941, December 7th, the day that will live in infamy. We've all heard that many, many times. December 7th, 1941. when it was over the radio, we all had radios at that time. That was the sole means of communication. And if you were to have a console standing on the floor with about 80 inches of empty space and the receiver and the speaker, that was Jumbotron for you. That was your means of communication. Now, my mother, when she heard, we all heard the declaration of war, how not declaration of war, but how Japan had launched a sneak attack on us. Can you imagine a woman of color telling all she had, her two boys, myself and my brother, boys, we're at war. I want you to serve your country. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? She said it, and we did it. I went to the Army recruiting, and my brother went over to Navy and Marines. And you know, it's a funny thing, folks. Those two buildings are still standing. The BU has taken over the Cadillac Olds building on the corner of Calm Ave, and the Fargo building on Summer Street with enlargements is still in existence. Is that John Moore over there? I was best man at his wedding. You sneaked in here. But you got a different woman. No, hey, talk to my wife. You guys will get together later. John, I'm so happy to see you. I'll talk later. We go back a long way. There's a reason why I didn't call you, you know. There's a reason. See how family we are? This is what America is. Well, let me tell you, I went over and enlisted in the United States Army. Well, we didn't have any black NCOs or DIs, drill instructors. We happened to have, I don't think this guy would survive today. He was a reincarnation of Archie Bunker. From a southern state, I won't name the state because it's irrelevant, but he was from a culture that it took me a while to understand. Now, he couldn't survive today. Number one, he was pot-bellied. He couldn't, be svelte like Larry and I, or like Larry and I think we are.
That's better.
He was a tobacco chewer, and he had snuff. Now, that guy couldn't survive today. But what I admire about him, even though he didn't use the N-word, but it was the way he pronounced Negro or something, it didn't just sound right. But maybe he knew better than to say the real deal with 80 people of color, and I'm the smallest one in the group. But one thing I admired about him, even though he had his innate racial animosity, it wasn't just against me, it was against all people of color, because that was the way he was raised. And it took me a long time to realize and to sympathize with how people are raised and they can't get over it. They can't get over it. So I happen to have been raised in a different environment, and I could suck it up. What I admired about him was, even though he had his, I'd say, imperfections, he was a soldier. And he could run the 3 or 5 or 10 miles with us with full pack. And this is what I respected. Even though he didn't treat me right, I respected his professionalism. and his ability to lead. I don't know if I follow him in combat, but he was our leader. Now, the theme that we have to talk about, I just don't like to ramble. I'd like to talk so we can communicate and so you can see just what America was like, to see what our country was enduring with racial strife in the midst of a conflict that would determine whether or not America would exist or be defeated. The person that I think embodies the whole business is Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., West Point class of 1938. I guess most of you soldiers, before I forget, I want to welcome all my fellow ancients here. I didn't forget, I was involved. You'll see me at the next meeting, so I'll get you a drink. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., and you young people, I'd like you to write his name down, Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., because wherever I go, wherever I speak, he was to me the quintessential American. That's the best way. An American, no matter what his background, no matter how other so-called Americans treat him, he sucks it up and moves on. He sucks it up and moves on. Now, how was Benjamin Davis treated at West Point? No one spoke to him. 4 years. No one spoke to him. And the tradition at West Point is when you sit down to eat, the food is passed around. You have 40 minutes to eat. When the dishes went around to him because his fellow cadets, good Americans, would stall the food, and when it would get to him, it'd be time to rush out and get back into formation. 4 years, West Point, a West Point cadet. Now he's sucked it up. Of course, when I go on and talk about him, I must say this. His dad was the first black one-star general. Didn't hurt, but he had to suck it up 4 years. When I talk about myself, it's not that I'm trying to make an impression or I want to run for mayor of Somerville. I wouldn't say that's the furthest thing in my mind, but that's not my ambition. My ambition is to share with you, to make you feel part of our ongoing conversation, that America stands for the best. And I don't like these slogans, make America great again, and so forth, because for some communities, make America great again is code for make America white again, lynching and Klansmen and all that good old American stuff. Now, Benjamin O. Davis' life taught me and others that no matter what the adversity, and we all have adversities, one of the benefits I had at being at a place like Yale was being with Rockefellers and Mellons and so forth. They had more problems than I did, mentally. But the reverse was, My problems might have been financial where those weren't. They had other bigger things. Now, Benjamin L. Davis, he was the only commander in combat time, 99th Fighter Squadron. 99th Fighter Squadron, those are P-51s, and you're to engage enemy aircraft. That was the only military fighter organization whose mission was not to engage enemy fighter aircraft, but to protect the bombers. And the bombers, of course, were all white crews. Can you imagine a fighter squadron not being able to engage enemy aircraft? Well, that was our mission. And during combat, Benjamin O. Davis was called back to Washington to justify why his fighter squadron hadn't downed any enemy aircraft. And he tried to explain that was not our mission. In the military, the first thing on your agenda, the first thing in the orderly room, the first thing in the CO, the first thing in the headquarters, mission statement. Why you're here, what you're going to do, and when it's going to be done. Benjamin O. Davis was called back to defend his record, but the Congress wanted them to fail. That's why there were no blacks in fighter and bomber aircraft, because it was skewed. The only exception was there was one Asian. He was Japanese in the 8th Aircraft B-17 crew. Now, what did that mean to me? And it doesn't, when I say what this means to me, this is what I tell. The same events. It's not a story. It's a factual event that's stated in official military records. Now, what happened to me was most interesting, because the military men will tell you that when you get orders to go to a school, technical training or whatever, the base CO never calls you. You get your orders, you pick up, and you leave. Well, I was detailed to attend the budget and fiscal finance thing, with all the mumble jumbles and numbers, at Fort Lee, Virginia, Camp Lee, Virginia, which is the excellent officers/country club, panels, the works. So General Dave, I got orders to attend the school. So when I got the orders, my boss says, well, Woodhouse, the base CO wants to see you. Now, guys, ladies, the worst thing you can have in your military career is to have a request for the base CO to see you. Oh my goodness, I was 19 or 20 at the time. I think I was 20. Oh my God, what did I do? Did I step on the officer's wife's foot at the club, or did I have another drink or something? Whatever. So I went in, and when you went into his office, there was a nice chair, and he was sitting ramrod. You didn't sit in the chair. You didn't sit in the chair. You stood at attention. That's the way he was. So here I was sitting in the stage at attention, and he said, Woodhouse, I'm sending you to this school. I want you to do a good job. Yes, sir. Saluted and left. Well, quick entry into this next thing. When I got to Camp Lee, Virginia, this was in 1948, I checked into the reason why I'm not a name dropper, because I don't want anyone to be a hater. In other words, some people hate people when they're dropping names. So don't be a hater. So now if I say I was with Barack and Michelle, and Michelle said, Woody, dear, what do you want in your tea? That's what happened. That's the way it was. And I volunteer at Harvard Law to lecture the black law students. They think I'm a professor, but I'm not a professor over there. I speak occasionally, but I take a special interest in seeing that all young people, black, white, and Asian, have the advantages in this country. All young people, that includes everybody. And I'm telling you, young people, you have my cards, and anything I can do to help you get on your right track, I'll be more than willing. Of course, whenever I speak to young people, I always tell them the first rule: make your bed, clean your room, and that always gets an applause. Now, you see what I mean? You're right. You know, when I think, next slide, please. All right, that's, you know, I was a trial lawyer, and when I passed the bar in 1956, there were 4 lawyers of color in the Commonwealth, 4. And the funny thing was, we all had, and the reason I could open up my law office, no one would hire me, so I need not apply. Now, need not apply has meaning for just about every ethnic group that came to America. The Irish had it, the Italians had it, we all had it. The only one that didn't have that exposure was the American Indian. Of course, we forced them off, so they weren't even in the mix. So when we rented our offices at Pemberton Square, everyone been to Government Center? You know that beautiful round curve. Well, before then was the Barristers Hall. And this is where every lawyer that didn't make the big law firms, this is where they all were. Now, Kevin White was on the first floor. He had the big thing. Kevin White was the mayor. I had a 6th floor room about this size with a partition. This is what you mean a solo practitioner. He starts off alone. He's got no clients. He just has the, you know, the desire to serve the community. Not make a living, serve the community. Kevin was on the 1st floor. I was on the 6th. Ed Brooke was on the 8th. Now get this. Some of you male members might remember Scarley Square. Now Scarley Square, that was a place where you could get a hot dog for 10 cents, Joe Nemo's. You get a Coke and a hot dog, and that was your lunch. It's 20 or 25 cents. Now, the first of the month, we'd all go over there. Kevin White, Ed Brooke, and myself. We'd go there. Why? Because the landlord was coming around to collect the rents. And none of us could afford, and didn't want to pay with 80 or 90 bucks for a rent. And that was back in the 50s. Now, I say that to say this, that the arc always flows on the side of justice. And even though things don't go, you know, obstacles, crisis, if you're persistent and if you're diligent and insisting on doing the right thing, do the right thing. And if you can't do the right thing, take a walk. Because if you're not able to withstand what's going down, you know, you get in the mix and you're lost. Next slide, please. Now, this was the dedication. We were coming in from a flight, British Airways. Tuskegee Airmen, we're having our national convention in Orlando. We still meet. And that's Mayor Menina want to write. We dedicated a bridge in Franklin Park to the Tuskegee Airmen. So we have at our convention approximately 3,000 or 4,000 people, but it's really the children and the grandchildren of the original 24. And we have original 24, and that statue in that was one of 20 made and given to the 20-odd surviving Tuskegee Airmen. And every year, the survivors were getting smaller and smaller. But one year, I met I have to thank her, a woman from her quilting group in one of our underserved communities, Marblehead. I didn't bring the quilt here, but it's a wonderful quilt, patriotic. And it just shows the arc of justice moves, the arc of righteousness, the arc of fairness moves in the direction of fairness. Now, I want to, next slide, please. Now, this gentleman on the left, no, on your left with the striped shirt, George Hardy. Interesting guy. He was one of the original Tuskegee Airmen. He is, I'm 92, he's 95. He's still kicking. As a matter of fact, he jumped last year. Now, I've been invited to give the presentation for the special JFK Special Forces at Fort Bragg. I'll be there next Sunday as we speak. The home of the Green Berets and the Rangers, and they've got the elite airborne groups there. Now, George Hardy, he was over in Italy, Vietnam, and Korea. Now, when I say about the arc of justice, now, if you look at George Hardy, you think he was white, because we have some guys in our group, they could be white, but they rather identify with black people. So we accept them, and they accept us. Now, George Hardy, he was detailed. You know, when you go out on the flying mission, you have your detail, pilot, co-pilot, communications, whatever. Now, he was scheduled to be a pilot on an aircraft. Now, one of the exec officer, now the exec in any organization runs the show. The exec runs out, and I don't think the exec was even rated, you know, pilot's wings. He told him, and this is a true story, and his name is George Hardy, Hardy. And whenever I speak, you ask me to give a name, I'll give a name. And why do I know all the names? Because I was the paymaster. And the paymaster in those days, you paid in cash, no checks. I had a satchel bag, and they signed. Okay, now, the exec officer, I'm not saying what southern state he was from, but I'm not calumnizing the South, but I could only tell that he was from the South. That's why I never mentioned the state from his accent. He told Hardy, "Get out of the cockpit. What are you doing there?" Can you imagine that? So George got out of the cockpit. To make a long story short, the substitute got in, went on a mission, plane shot down, destroyed, never came back, never recovered the remains. BOQ-OK. So then when I went to the officers club, I'm standing at the door. The officers club in those days, white tablecloths, napkins, stewards, and you know, it was a country club, officers club. I was stood there waiting for the Metro D to seat me. He never did, because I saw people coming and going and eating, and I'm still standing up there like Mickey the Dunce. So I called a black steward over. I said, "What's the deal?" He says, are you an officer? I said, "Well, I wasn't much of an officer, first lieutenant. I mean, one silver bar, that's nothing." So he said, "Well, we don't eat here." I said, "What do you mean we don't eat here?" I said, "I'm going to be TDY here for 8 weeks. What am I going to do?" So we called his boss over, a white guy, and he says, "Gee, Lieutenant," he's very courteous. He said, "Gee, I don't know what to tell you, but we don't have any," he didn't know how to say it, "but we don't have any blank officers here on the base." I said, "Well, I'm here now. I'll be here for 8 weeks." At the school. He says, "Well, I don't know what to tell you." I said, "Well, I'm going to be here 8 weeks, and I'm not demanding, but I requested I be served." So he says, "Well, I'll tell you what." He says, "I'll serve you." He says, "But I'm going to have to put a screen around you." I'll have to put a screen around you. So I was hungry, but I was TO'd, to use a polite word, and the screen came, lovely steak, but I couldn't eat it. I couldn't eat it. So I just left. Fast forward, forget but sometimes I'm asked the question, "Well, what did you do? What did you do?" I had to eat at the snack bar for 8 weeks. And folks, whatever you do, if ever you invite me to your house, I don't want to see another cheese or ham sandwich or peanut butter and jelly, because that's what I had for 8 weeks. But what really disturbed me as you get later on in life was why none of my classmates, they were mostly all captains and majors, why, and we were only 20 in the group, why none of them, not one, said, "Woody, we missed you at the club," or "We don't see you around." That's what troubled me. Now, when I got back, the CO, said, "Woodhouse, I heard you passed the course." Now, that's unusual. And it took me a long while to realize why I was sent. Well, number one, I had known his father-in-law, at Yale, because his father-in-law was a dentist. And what he would do was he would invite the students from Yale and Harvard down for Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas, because we didn't have the money to go home. So that's how I knew him. Now, the theme of the challenge is how the arc of justice always comes down on the side of the right. Not because of, but in spite of his ill treatment, West Point now has the most fantastic architecturally designed building at West Point. And I hope some of you get to visit West Point to see the Davis, dedicated to General B.O. Davis, Jr. We have a technician here whose initials are LW. This was not done by MGM. This is done by MGM LW. So figure that one out. Now, Major Gleed, he was in charge. He served in combat. And this is the drill exercise at Lockbourne. Now, Lockbourne was a segregated base. We went through 4 or 5 bases. They didn't want 4,000 or 5,000 blacks on one base because it may disturb the community. Can you imagine a base not wanting that many people initially, but then afterwards, when they found out how much money, the millions we were pouring into their economy, we were somewhat welcomed. Okay, next slide, please. Now, oh yes, my glorious days, 1920, and this was the Officers Club. Now, we prided ourselves, even though we had segregated, even though no people wanted to come to us. But then when you do something good, and I always think of what Steve Martin, the comedian, says, you know, comedians do have words of wisdom. He says, there's no substitute for excellence. There's no substitute for excellence. So you school kids, take it down on it. Now, in the top right, you see that flash, literal flash, that's Mal Whitfield. He went to the Olympics and won his event in the International Olympics back in the late 40s. Now, on the right, we're at the Yale commencement. Now, what's significant about that? That was the dean of Yale College, but sitting behind me were the Bush twins, Laura and Jenna. One graduated from Yale, and I was sitting up there as a fellow. You know what happens when people discriminate against you, or whatever? It seems like the arc of justice flips around, because now I was named to the first board of governors for the Yale Association. In other words, I didn't know whether I had just been that long on duty or whether it was because I had sent in my 25 annual dues for the class. And that's my mother. Yeah, that's my mother and I. This is at my graduation at Yale. Now, I want you young people to take advantage that when I graduated from Yale in 1952, the quota for blacks was 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. And I saw the first black Yale graduation. This guy was in a robe, and I was in a robe. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said to me, "What are you doing here?" Well, here's what happened. I was in the humanities, French, German, and mathematics. He was pre-med, bio-chem. You know, the chem labs, they put those away so the smells don't go, you know. But that's the way it was. But they say, "Well, Woodhouse, how did you feel about being segregated at Yale?" I said, "Well, segregation sucks, but good things can happen." Now, what's a good thing that happened? No one would room with this black guy, so I had to have a single room, a single suite with all the millionaires. Because across the hall from me, you go to these elite schools and you think it's all the same. They have suites reserved for alumni, people that give. And I'm not going to be a name dropper. And, now, those stories are tragic, but, it could have happened any other way. But you see what racism does, or what racism did? See how they are. Steve, good to see you. Don't hide from me. You know how the arc of justice rose and how the arc of justice worked. Now, why do I say that? Because if you don't have the right attitude, if you can't open yourself if you can not only open yourself, but try to see through the eyes and feelings of the other person that you're speaking with or talking with, or heaven help the person that you're living with, which can be bad. Oh, that's one of our groups now. Of that group, with maybe 2 exceptions, all gone. All gone. Now we have our group. Now that young man in the middle, I introduced him to his wife. We were in the same class at English high school. And I'm trying to get a plaque named in honor of one of our men who was shot down, and his body never recovered in Mediterranean. Next slide. Oh, yes, yes. Now, on the right is Tom Hudner. On the left is Thomas Kelly.
Tom Kelly.
Yeah, did I say Tom Kelly?
You said Kelly.
Okay, yeah. Now, Tom Hudner, Congressional Medal of Honor. Tom Kelly, Congressional Medal of Honor. Now, Tom Hudner, we all know the story of how he had crash-landed his plane in Korea to rescue his black wingman, Jesse Brown, the first black naval aviator from Annapolis. This is what happened. Jesse Brown was shot down. Tom Hudner crash-landed his plane to rescue him. What heroism. Am I right, gang? What heroism. What bravery to crash-land your plane to rescue your wingman. That wasn't the case when Tom got back to his carrier. Can anyone tell me what type of reception Tom got when he got back? Any volunteers?
You destroyed a plane.
Yeah, he destroyed a plane. Destruction of government property. And he was up for court-martial. Because on an aircraft carrier, the worst thing you can do is to lose an aircraft. Destruction of government property. But Tom was from Phillips Andover. It always pays to have good parents. Always pays to have a few bucks in your pocket and know you're a politician. The mother went to the senator. The senator went to the president. And President Truman, he had just signed the act abolishing segregation in the armed forces. President Truman was, what is the word we use in civilian talk that I know for military people, but I can't use here? Well, he was BS'd, okay? He was BS. He was flabbergasted. That's the polite word with ladies. President Truman was flabbergasted. He says, what, with all of these racial problems that we have in America today, you're going to court-martial a white aviator for rescuing his black wingman? No. Get the CNO on the phone, and you tell him that not only is he not going to court-martial Thomas A. Hudner, UCNO will be the one to write up his recommendation for the CMH, the Congressional Medal of Honor. And that's how Tom got his Congressional Medal of Honor. Now, now you know the story. Now you're going to hear the story where your humble speaker got involved. I was hosting the annual convention for the Tuskegee Airmen, and we also had the Association of Black Airline Pilots. So it was a fantastic thing. We had the Westin Hotel. I had the presidential suite, And if any of you get to host a convention, always ask for the presidential suite, because it's usually comped. It's usually comped. So, Mass Historical Society, there's a plug for you. So I had him over as our guest speaker. What fitting guy to have for your guest speaker? A white guy rescuing one of us. Gee, that's great. So I said, Tom, I want you to be our guest speaker. I said, I'm sending a limo for you, and his headquarters he was Commissioner of Veteran Services at that time, and his office was at Center Plaza. No, Southern Star Building, across the street, Southern Star Building. Now, the limo had to take him from the Southern Star Building to the Westin in Copley Place. I'll never forget it. So I told the limo, I said, look, you pick Tom up around noon, take him to the Westin, and you be with him as long as he wants, until he gets ready to go home. So limo picks up. Tom makes a wonderful presentation, and you know how military and aviators like to talk, and boom, boom, boom. Tom didn't leave till around 6 o'clock. And, you know, he lives in Concord. Okay, so we were tabbing out the convention expenses, what we got, and the expenses. So they came up to Tom's expenditure, which I had authorized, for like $800. So the committee guy says, well, Woodhouse, $800, are you crazy? To take a taxi from a government center to Weston? He said, 800, that's a lot of money. I said, it's a lot of money for a lot of guy. So the guy was questioning, you know, not my integrity, because the receipt was their big limo company. So what I did, when they were going over the thing, I pulled out what's called a New York ward. A New York ward, ladies and gentlemen, you have a couple of hundreds on top, and then inside are ones and fives. So I slapped it on the table. I said, look, there's $800 here. If you guys don't want to pay it, take it out of that. Oh, Woodhouse, you're so sensitive. I says, okay. Okay, you're forcing me, but, you know, it's authorized. But Tom and I tell that story because the arc of justice, if we wait long enough, and if we're patient enough, right will come. I know it's hard to say. It took me a long time to realize that. But when people come to me, you know, about her husband or BF or whatever, not treating them right, I always think of the scripture. Leave her or him to heaven. Leave him or her to heaven. Now, the couple of last things I want to wind up with. All right, that's at the governor's reception. You know, one of the things about being old and being somewhat in possession of my faculties sometimes is that I love people, and I see a lot of good in a lot of things that might not even be there. And now, that doesn't mean to say that I still believe in the Easter Bunny and the Easter Rabbit. But sometimes we have to take things on blind faith. Now, when my mother told boys, I want you to serve your country, that meant something to me much later on. I just, you know, did it because this is not what was required, but because at that time, boys did what their mother said. The girls were, my sisters were a little shaky, but the boys followed mom. See? Now, when you can find a foundation, and this goes for all of us, and there's one thing that we all have in common here. All of us have one thing in common, no matter our age or sex and so forth. We all have/had a mother. That's how we all came here into this world. Now, when I say that, a lot of people have never thought that out. But all of us are from a woman. And that is, to me, a dignified expression. To me, it was not so dignified. When my mother, well, I was getting ready for Boston Latin School. I had prepared and so forth. Now, it's not that our parents have lied and misrepresented when they say about the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy and Christmas and all that stuff. It's that they want us to have some type of basis of culture that gives us a reason to believe, a reason to trust, a reason to live. Now, preparing for Boston Latin School, it was, to me, something to look forward to. Now, my parents went up to Boston Latin School. No, my father did. And he said, he was asked, well, when are you going to give the examination? And when are you going to interview for Boston Latin School? Now, that's a public school, not Roxbury Latin, which is private and all boys, but Boston Latin School is a public school of Boston. So when my father went up, they said, Reverend, I'm sorry, we don't interview or take exam for your school district. Well, we've been living in the projects at that time. Now, if there's anything poorer than a Catholic priest, it's a black priest in the Episcopal Church. Living in the project. Public housing, you know. So my mother, they didn't lie. But she said, well, they never told me that they never gave the examination and interview for where I lived because they didn't want me to feel victimized. They didn't want me to hate white people. I do hate a few. Some of them in Washington. But to give me a feeling of sense and worth, she said, well, you know, son, Dad and I were thinking English High would be much closer than Boston Latin School. And besides, I'll make you your favorite sandwiches. I fell for it. She said that so I would have a positive view of life. And that no matter what the circumstance, I suck it up and do my best. And the end of that story is I was the first person to graduate from Yale from Boston English High School in 75 years because Yale and Harvard at that time did not accept public school people. You were from Phillips, Exeter, Andover, Middle. Oh, I hope my group isn't with all preppies. Well, I just want to close with these words that I always use, no matter where I go, no matter where I speak, and so forth. Oh, that on the left is General Dunford, Chief of Staff, and Marine, and we got to be knowledgeable. I could never presume to be a friend to the Army Chief of Staff, but how did I get to know the the Chief of Staff of the Marine Corps? I didn't mention this, but my brother was one of the first black Marines, Mountford Point. And military people know what a Mountford Point Marine was. You were a Marine, black, but you were not allowed on Camp Lejeune, the main base. You were relegated to Mountford Point, which was the garbage disposal area. But still a Marine, still American. I'll close with the words I always say. You can talk about me all you please, but I'll talk about you on my knees. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say thank you very much.